we're ready to go now. Yeah. Okay, hey, how's everyone feeling this morning? You good? Yeah? Anyone like super exhausted already from the week?
From the stairs.
Yeah. Pardon? From yesterday, yeah, from running around campus. At least it's not like 40 degrees because that would be like so much worse. Can you imagine? And also, does anyone notice already that the car parks are starting to get full? Like I noticed this morning the car park was already getting full when I came in. I was like, there we go. So just remember that tip for next week, especially for the first like 3 weeks up until basically the census date. The car parks, this car park, unless you're here at like 8 o'clock, you won't be able to park in. So give yourself some extra time because you probably have to walk quite a long way. So that's just my little tip for today. I also just wanted to quickly remind you guys about these ones if you've still got it with you, because the stuff I'm going to be talking about this morning you can find sort of a little bit further through the assignments step by step. I've also got some common task words that I'm going to talk more about in a moment, as well as some stuff about referencing and academic integrity, which I'll only touch on a little bit today, but I will hold a referencing workshop a little bit later in the semester. So if referencing is something that really freaks you out, because it does freak out a lot of students, and it's really important that you get it right. So yeah, we'll get to that soon, okay? The other thing I want to show you just quickly before I start is the study skills blog, which I mentioned mentioned yesterday. So this one has a lot of some of the stuff that we've been talking about today, but it kind of goes through in a lot, this week I should say, goes through in some detail. So like I've got a whole series, for example, just on essay writing, which is just sort of one aspect of academic writing, things like time management, and then some of the transition stuff that we talked about in yesterday's lecture. And they're both sort of written blogs, and they have videos on them as well. So if you don't want to read, you can just watch me talking at you like you watched a lecture. And they go for about 10 minutes each, so it's not like a huge time commitment. So just so you know that that's there, if you just Google Yunggorendi Study Skills blog, you'll find it, and the link's in this one as well, plus on Flow and whatever. And another thing is, just so that you know, all of the reason why you had to wait and get all this set up before we started is because they're all being recorded. So yeah, the links to all of the workshops and the lectures will be posted on Flow, probably early next week, hopefully, as well as the lecture slides and some of the other materials that we've kind of talked about. So if you miss anything, don't panic, you can find it all online, okay? All right, so I'm going to talk about assignments today, sort of what type of assignments you can expect to do at uni, and you're all in quite different courses, so this will look a little bit different for most of you, but I'll just touch a little bit on the most common ones. But then what I think is a really important thing about assignment writing that far too many of my students don't really think about properly, and that is like the steps of putting an assignment together, particularly something like an essay. Because they're not really, especially at university level, an essay isn't the type of thing you can just whip together the night before it's due. As much as we like to hope that we can do that, and look, you technically can, really, you can write anything and submit it, like you can do that, but you're probably not going to get the grades that you would like if that's your method. So I want to go through these steps because these are the things that I've found through experience with working with students and from teaching for so many years, that students just don't really think about enough, or maybe have never really been taught properly before. So I think it's really important. We'll also touch on research because, again, that's a really, really important thing about uni, and probably one of the biggest differences if you're used to research at high school or something. You'll probably find the leap to the level of research that's expected at university is really quite steep. A lot of the stuff that you might be used to may not be appropriate in a university environment. And then I'll really quickly touch on a program called Turnitin, which is how you actually submit your assignments. Has anyone used Turnitin before? Cool. Did you use it at school or? Oh, I didn't know they were using it at school, so cool. All right, so these are the kind of most common types of assignments. So hang on, just for my memory, who here is studying like a humanities-y kind of topic? So like a English, education, social work, that kind of stuff? Yep. So you guys will be writing a lot of essays. You might be writing a lot of things like article summaries, article critiques and reviews, literature reviews and case studies and reflections. Is anyone doing nursing? You're going to write a lot of reflections. So we'll talk about that quickly. Who's in the sciences? A few people. Yep. So you guys are going to be doing a lot of reports, lab reports. You probably also will do some literature reviews, article critiques. All of you will probably have to do group work. Yay. No, everybody loves group work. And oral presentations are really common as well. So essays are probably the most common type of assignment that you'll do, and they are really useful even if you don't have to write a lot of essays. Knowing how an essay is structured and how to write in a really logical, structured, cohesive way is something you can apply to all different kinds of written assignments. And so even if it's not literally an essay, I think it's still really good to understand what makes up an essay. So basically, it's a piece of writing, but what kind of distinguishes it, I suppose, from a lot of other types of writing is that its main purpose is to argue something. So you're putting forward an idea, you're backing up that idea with evidence, you're making a claim, and you're trying to convince your reader by the end of that essay that the point that you've made is valid and they should accept it. So for that reason, it needs to be very logical, and it needs to contain what we call a thesis. So is a thesis a word that's common to anybody? Few nods, yeah. You might be aware of a thesis as being like a long written piece of work, like when you do an honours project or a PhD, for example, you write a thesis. But technically what a thesis is an argument. It's that argument plus evidence coming together to create this strong evidence-backed up idea that you're putting forward. So all essays need a thesis. And they're very logically structured, so you usually have a few key points that are going to support that argument, and you have your introduction, your body paragraphs, and your conclusion. And so one of the reasons why I think it's really useful, even if you're not writing an argumentative piece, so if it's not technically an essay, maybe it's reflective writing, or maybe it's a report or something like that, is still thinking about this logical structure of ideas and how we're building with evidence so that our writing is cohesive and we're sort of presenting something in a way that the reader can follow and make sense of how all of the ideas are connected to each other. So yeah, not all pieces of writing will have that argument, but they should all have that same sort of logical structure. Reports are the next one, and these are a very, very specific type of writing. So I guess an essay has a lot more freedom with it. Like you can sort of put forward really not any argument you want, but like you have a lot of freedom with the type of argument you want to put forward and the types of like claims that you're going to use to back that up. And what order you present those in, what evidence you use to support them. Whereas a report is much, much more structured. So it has to include very specific types of information, and it has to be presented in a very specific structure. Usually that includes an abstract. Has anyone written an abstract before? Yeah? No? You will get used to those probably, maybe not so much in your first year, but certainly by second and third year you'll probably be writing abstracts. They're not quite an introduction. They're really like a summary of the whole report. So they sort of give what's the idea, what's the method that's been used, or like what's the hypothesis, what's the method that's been used, what were the results, and what's the conclusion, all in one short little paragraph. They're actually really difficult to write, but if you need to write one, we can talk about it. So then you also have introduction, methods, discussion, conclusion, recommendations, references, and appendices. And they may not all be included, but the ones I've got in bold are the ones that you'll probably never write a report without those ones. Lab reports are very similar. Okay, basically the same thing, but of course you're talking about an experiment that you actually did. And if you are doing the sciences, you're going to get very used to writing these. You'll have to write 1 million of them. You may even need to, in some topics, write like a report every week or two. So we can talk about that one-on-one if you ever want to go through them specifically. Article summaries are pretty much what they sound like. So you'll be expected to read somebody else's work and summarize it, which sounds easy. Actually, it's nowhere near as easy as it sounds. So this is something that's quite different from like an essay, because you're not putting forward any of your own ideas or opinions, right? You're not adding evidence. You're not persuading anybody. You're simply restating what's been said in a very succinct way. And the point of these really is to show that you've understood what you've read, really, and that you can articulate something in a concise and efficient way, because that's really important. In your writing, is being able to say things concisely, but it's also something that's much harder than it seems. Now, an article critique or a review is so students often confuse an article summary and an article critique or review because they are different. So whereas a summary is just what has the original author said, it has no extra input from you, an article critique or an article review does. This is where you start with the summary, but then you go further and you start to analyse. So you start to pull apart, what has this author said? What's strong about it? What's weak about it? What have they missed? Or how does it connect with some other ideas that you've been talking about, or some other readings or the wider literature in the field? Literature reviews are quite a little bit like an article summary, but they go way, way bigger. So this is where you're comparing and contrasting a range of articles or books, or journals within a particular topic area in order to see what does the current research say about this subject. And this is really important in research. So any new research project that you do, you will have to write a literature review. But they can be really scary to write because they're quite big. They're quite huge projects. If you were to do like a master's thesis or a PhD, you could end up with a literature review that's 8,000 words long. Okay, don't worry, you won't have to do that in undergrad. In undergrad, you probably only have to write them that are about 2,000 words, so don't panic. But what I mean is that they can be really big because they're all about canvassing all of the literature that exists in the field. Do you guys actually even, that makes me think, do you know what I mean when I say the literature in the field? Is that like a phrase that's familiar? No? So basically because you will hear this a lot, okay, particularly again if you're studying something like health sciences or nursing, they're going to refer to the literature quite often. They'll also refer to like peer review. Is that something that's familiar to you guys? No? Okay, so we'll go through peer review as well. And to like academic journals. So basically what these are, because you are now in a university, and these are places of not just teaching, but of developing new knowledge, right? So all of the academics who teach you, they're also probably working on research projects at the same time. And their research projects will be in something really quite specific. And the aim of those is to contribute something new to knowledge. So they're trying to discover something new, trying to prove something, and sometimes these can be the smallest things that they're adding, but they're quite important. So they publish these findings in what we call peer review research journals. Okay, you might hear them being referred to as peer review, as journals, as periodicals as well. These are basically a little bit like magazines. So they publish maybe four a year, maybe 10 a year, whatever it might be, and they each contain a dozen, 20 or so articles written by different authors, and each of these articles is those findings that are being published. So what research have they done, how did they do it, and what did they find? Okay, does that make sense? Yep. So the peer review part of that means that, because they're not just being published by anybody to prove or keep the standards of what's being published really high, they go through a process of peer review, which means basically other scholars in the field, other experts, other researchers read the work, they critique it, they make sure that it's meeting certain standards, that it doesn't have any errors, that it's not sort of totally out of left field, and then they decide, yes, this is worthy of being published, or no, this is not, you need to go back and make revisions and whatever. So it's basically about ensuring that the standards of research are kept quite high, okay? So for you guys, as students, you're also entering into this like scholarly conversation is what you also might hear it referred to as. And that's really because everything that you guys do is part of this exchange of knowledge. You're not just here to absorb knowledge and to learn things. You're here to actively take part in the creation of that knowledge. Okay, and so being part of that scholarly conversation means that you are engaging with that literature, right? That all of those research findings, and that can include books and things like that as well, particularly in subjects like the humanities, like history, social sciences. They might publish books instead of journal articles, but it's about you being aware of what is being published, what new research exists, how that's relevant to the work that you're doing, how that's relevant to the field that you're going into or the concepts that you're learning about, how it's growing and evolving and changing, and that you're able to critique that as well, because your opinions matter here, okay? You do have a platform where you're able to disagree with a top scholar, and you can write about that, and that's legitimate. You know, you can do that, but you need to learn the processes about how to do it, and these are the methods through which you do it, okay? Does that all kind of make sense? Yeah? So just remember those words: peer review, literature, scholarly literature, and periodicals and research journals, because those are what you're going to hear a lot of from now on, okay? And I'll talk more about this in the research section of this, about how you actually access those. So case studies, meanwhile, these are pretending either if you go on placement or something like that, or you sort of pretend that you've gone on placement. You might be given a scenario and you're expected to respond to that as though it's kind of real life. Like, what was the situation? What happened? And then importantly, why might you have done what you did? And how do your actions reflect the concepts and the theory and things like that that you've been learning about? And so this is the type of thing like reflective writing, where even though you're writing about yourself and your own experiences, it is still important to be able to relate that back to the literature, to be able to say, okay, I acted in this way because, according to so-and-so, a hand hygiene is one of the most important aspects of being a nurse. Therefore, before I spoke to the patient, I washed my hands in this manner. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
What about like official documentation, stuff like legislation?
Yeah, I will talk about that. Yeah. So that's what we call grey literature. Okay, so we've got the academic literature, that's peer review, journals, and scholarly books. Then we've got grey literature, that's stuff like reports, government reports, even stuff like maps, things like that. So I've got a slide on those. I'll talk to you about it, soon. Okay, but don't panic. Guides for all of these are available through the Student Learning Centre website. I think it's going to be renamed soon to the Student Learning and Support Service, but I've got links to them all on the Yunggorendi student flow page, okay? And of course, you can come and see me if you want help learning how to deconstruct any of these kinds of writing, okay? So this is the stuff that I'm here for. You can drop in and see me for like an hour or so, and we can go through any of this stuff if you need to, okay? So even if it is just like when you get your first essay or your first article summary or something, and even though you might have written a million essays before, if you just want to check, do I understand this in a university context, or I just want to talk through my ideas, or I just want to make sure I've understood the question correctly, like, come and see me, okay? That's why I'm here. All right, so now we're going to talk about each of the 5 steps of putting your assignment together. And this includes these 5 things, which I'll break down. So the first one is analysing the task. So I wish students spent longer on this. Has anyone ever got the feedback of like, you need to read the question more closely, or you've misunderstood this particular aspect of the assignment or something? This is something that it doesn't take very long But we often just skim read a question and we just assume that we know what we're supposed to do and we don't spend the time breaking it down. And this is especially so in tests and exams when we're feeling that like time pressure, you don't read things properly and you just start writing because you're feeling a bit frantic. But really, if you just take a moment to actually properly go through each word of the question and think about what is it actually really asking me, that can make a huge difference and save you a lot of time than, you know, suddenly thinking, oh no, I've written this thing, but actually I need to write that thing. So if this is an example, I've got an example here, but a couple of things that I want to point out in particular is that there's the language of the question, including the key words, so the key topic words of the question. So the key topic words will be things like that relate to the subject that you're studying, the main themes, or something like that. But then we also have the key task words. So the key task words are actually what do you need to do and how do you need to do it, okay? So those can include, I guess, actually, let's have a look at this example. So if this question says, drawing from your research throughout the semester, discuss how colonialism and ideas of race have influenced and continue to influence policy measures related to Indigenous peoples today. For example, protection, assimilation, or military intervention. Importantly, consider critical responses and actions by Indigenous people at key moments in history that have resisted such ideas and policies. In your analysis, you will need to engage with the core topic themes: histories past and present, representation and identity, Indigenous knowledge and voice, justice, rights, and resistance and transformation. So, I know this is a long question. It's not unusual to have a question of this length, particularly in like humanities topics. What do you think the key topic words are here? So topic words being those words that relate to the topic. Yeah. Colonialism. Race. Yep. Yep. Race.
Assimilation.
Yep. Assimilation. So these are examples of what? Yep. Yeah, protection, intervention. So those are, you don't have to write about those things, but these are examples of some subjects from the topic that you might want to write about. So it does mean, yeah, you're going to be writing primarily about colonialism and race in relation to a policy measure. So policy is a really important topic word there, okay, because that's actually probably one of the most important things. And you need to think about these themes. That's quite a lot that's asking of you. What about the task words, though? Does anyone know? So this is how do you need to do it? What is it telling you about the format that this assignment will take? Discuss, yes. Discuss how. So what do you think of when you hear the word discuss? What does that mean to you?
Breaking down the elements of each topic in regards to race,
yeah.
for instance.
Breaking it down, so going into detail about each of those topics. Yep. It would also discuss would also mean probably comparing and contrasting. So it might mean putting a few ideas together.
Maybe even the impacts of
yeah.
And maybe with the contrast of how it was back then compared to today, and
yep.
how those events impact on, say, the following generation.
Yeah, so impact and kind of what you're talking about there with like what does that mean from then to today, we might call that implications. Yeah. So impact and implications would be a big part of discuss. So yeah, that's 100% correct. Any other important words? There's another really important word in here that's often overlooked by students, sort of hiding in plain sight as a task word. A critical response, that is one of the tasks, yes. So a critical response is a response that is analytical, thinks about the literature, poses a lot of questions. Yep, but there's a really tiny little word in here. Yeah?
Is it like, it's a research essay?
That's not the one I'm thinking of, but that is important, yes. So the research part of the research essay indicates to us it's written in an essay form, and because it's a research essay, you're being expected to draw upon the scholarly literature, okay? So that is super, super important. The word I'm thinking of is how, okay? So what does how tell you? Anyone? So what might the difference between how and why be? Or what? They seem similar on the surface, but they're really different, yeah? Perfect, yes. If we're being asked how, we're thinking about processes. We're thinking about methods, okay? If we're being asked why, we're going more into reasons. We're going more into cause and effect. Okay, if we're asked what, we're going more into description or summary or something like that, okay? So those are words that look the same, like your brain doesn't register them as being particularly different from each other, but those are three very different responses, right? Being asked to write about process as opposed to cause and effect as opposed to a description. So it's important to really pay attention to these things. When you're analysing the task, another important thing to consider is the weight and the length, okay? This is a 2,000 word essay and it's worth 40%. Okay, that has a lot of weight. This is an important essay. So that tells me I'm going to give this a lot of time and attention and effort. I'm probably going to start it early. I'm going to make sure that I use lots of resources. Like you said, it's a research essay. So that tells me that they're going to expect to see that I'm drawing on a range of different sources. And so that comes under the research expectations. And then this tells you kind of hopefully this will be included in your assignments, and not always is this included in the assignment description itself, but usually somewhere in your topic guidebook you'll get some information about what you need to do to pass, making sure like what referencing system you need to use and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, point is spend some time on that one. And that means in order to do that you need to be able to manage your time, because like I said, if this is a 40% 2,000 word essay, I'm not going to spend the same amount of time as I might a 600 word reflection that's worth 10%, okay? But sometimes the reflection feels really easy, so we might start there and get distracted and spend heaps of time on it, and then suddenly we've, like, oh, no, wait, this 2,000 word essay is here suddenly, and I've spent 2 weeks on this reflection, and now I only have 1 week for this essay. Plot that in your diary like I was talking about yesterday, like kind of start at the due date and work backwards. What are each of the steps that I want to do? And I would put these steps in there, like planning, research, etc. So planning. This is another stage that students skip all the time. Who actually writes, if you're going to write an essay or another kind of a piece of writing, who spends time writing out like a plan, like maybe you use dot points, bullet points or something? Okay, good. Good, some people. Is anyone like to just sit down and start writing? Does anyone sit down at the computer and they see the white blank page and they just freeze and have like literally no idea what to do? Yes. The terror of the blank page, as I call it. I'm very familiar with that. I'm a writer, professional writer as well, so I'm very, very, very familiar with the terror of the blank page. But often the terror of the blank page happens when we haven't spent enough time planning. And so what we want to do before we start any kind of writing is just like scrap paper, start jotting down your ideas. And this can be part of that analysing the task process as well, is where you're just thinking about, okay, well, if I'm being asked to present, if we're thinking about that previous question, you might write down like, okay, well, I've got colonialism and race in relation to policy measures. Okay, so what policies can I just think of off the top of my head that I might like to discuss? So you might write down a list of policies that you can think of, or what policies have we discussed in class that might be relevant here? And then you might think of, okay, well, once I've done that, how are they related to key moments in history? What key moments can I think of that would be really relevant? Oh, actually, maybe this policy and this key moment will come together really well. And that's going to tie in with, all of these themes. And you can just start jotting it out for yourself and getting an idea of what do you actually even want to write about, If you can even start with just a little bit, it'll give you the key words that you need that you can then plug into the Flinders library catalogue to get your resources. Like if you don't know where you're starting, if you're just starting with those really big words like colonialism and race, and you put those into Find It at Flinders, you're going to find so much information and very little of it is going to be relevant to you. Whereas if you put in colonialism and, you know, whatever the name of the policy is, or something like that, you're going to find a much narrower amount of research that's going to be much more relevant to your assignment, isn't it? So even doing that initial planning can save you heaps of time in things like the research project. So then you also want to start thinking about, okay, well, what ideas do I have? You might need to go and do a little bit of reading to learn a little bit more about the topic, or you might feel like you know enough that you can start doing some brainstorming before you even get started with more research. So what ideas do you have? How are they connected to each other? What evidence do you have that you might be able to use to support those ideas? You can try doing something like a mind map. I like brainstorming what I call my vomit draft. And so this is literally where I just like vomit everything I think I know about the topic onto the page and see where my ideas take me. You also might like to try free writing. That can be really useful as well. That's where you just start writing and you don't really stop. You don't think about it. You just see where your brain goes and, oh, yeah, I didn't know that I knew that. And suddenly you can often surprise yourself with the ideas that you come up with. That works for some people. It doesn't work for everybody. But basically, we want to end up with a plan sort of. This is what I do. So this is literally what my plans look like for any piece of writing that I do, okay? And this is this hierarchical method that I was talking about yesterday with the note-taking, except in this case, I've used it for a plan. I've used it with the example of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, because why not? So as you can see, I've sort of got an introduction. I dot point, okay, so what do I actually need to cover in my introduction? I need to cover background, I need to cover themes. I included my thesis statement. I then break it down into key point 1, key point 2, and key point 3. So what is the main idea in each key point? So that would be they would become my main body paragraphs. I then bring up what key ideas will I bring up within each. So if I've got one key idea, what sort of sub-points are going to prove that idea? What are my examples going to be? Or what is my evidence that's going to support that point going to be? So that, hopefully, when I come to write, and your plan can get much bigger than that. It can stay that small or it can get really, really detailed. I often then bring in the names of the authors that I'm going to include to back up each point. So if I was talking about an example for overcoming adversity, right, I might then have, well, this scholar actually talks about adversity in this journal. And so I'm going to refer to that scholar to help me prove that point so that I've got a note to myself like, yeah, that person's going to be relevant here. What this is really useful for is that when you actually come to write and you've got that blank page sitting in front of you, you know exactly what you need to do. You know, you can just go, okay, well, I just need to write my introduction. And I know exactly what I need to cover in my introduction because I've got dot points that tell me, you know, so it becomes much easier. You're no longer trying to remember everything that you need to do. Because if you just sit down without a plan, you're thinking about the overall ideas, you're thinking about the structure, you're thinking about the research and how your evidence is going to back up each point. Then you're also thinking at a nitty-gritty level of the sentence structure and how it's actually going to read. You're thinking about grammar, punctuation. That's a lot. You know, like no wonder you get overwhelmed and you sit at the computer and you can't write anything. It's because your brain is overloaded. So this is about taking a lot of that load off and putting it on the page so you don't have to carry it. So when you sit down to write, you can just write. And it also means if you're like, okay, well, I've only got an hour between these two classes, but in that hour, I know that I can write this, 500-word paragraph. I don't have to think about the whole essay because I know what I'm doing in this section. Okay, so it can be also really good for time management. So the next one is research. So you will need to find evidence that's going to support your claims. And this, I should say as well, the planning and the research kind of go hand in hand. So it might be a little bit of back and forth. Okay, so don't feel like this has to be A, B, C, D, E. But this is where you will find those things that I was talking about earlier, the peer-reviewed journal articles, academic texts. You might use textbooks and appropriate websites and what we call grey literature. So this is what peer-reviewed journals look like. Okay, they usually, when you go through Flinders, you'll be taken to a database. And the databases are, there's lots of different types of databases for different disciplines, and they all store different journals. So I can see here that this is the actual, so this is the database, Wiley Online, okay? This is the journal. It's a journal called Popular Culture, all right? And this is similar to, many journal pages look similar to this. They will be laid out slightly differently, but usually not too much. So I can tell that this is the journal. In this case, it actually has a picture of the cover, which is very helpful, but it's also up here, the Journal of Popular Culture. So that tells me this is the journal I'm looking at. This is the article, okay? And yes, people write scholarly articles about Buffy. I have an entire book of scholarly articles about Buffy. The author, and then we've got the title and the actual article itself. And I can tell that this is peer review because it's got things like citations. Okay, so that means that other people who've published research have referred to this journal. I've got what's called this DOI number, and this DOI number you will need to use if you're using APA referencing, but I'll talk about that later. And I can also see the volume and the issue number. So all journals will have a volume number. They most of the time have an issue number. So that's what a peer review journal usually looks like. We then have academic texts, so books that are written by a scholar. These can be, you can use academic books, but they're a little bit harder to tell. They're not peer reviewed in the same way as a journal is, but they do go through a process of being edited by other scholars. So they are, relevant to use. And they're usually written by one or two authors, or you might have a collection that's got different essays by different authors and is edited by a team. They're also, of course, just as good sources as peer review journals. Now, appropriate websites are things like our government websites and discipline-specific websites. So, for example, if you are studying nursing, you'll probably use the nursing and midwifery website quite often. So those are trustworthy. It can be a little bit of a question sometimes of how do we know if it's trustworthy or not, but you just need to think about what's relevant and what would be appropriate in my discipline. So you might need to use statistics or something. Australian Bureau of Statistics is a really trustworthy organisation to get statistics from. And you'll become more familiar with which websites you're able to use in your disciplines as you sort of, get going. So what's not appropriate, however, and I'm sure hopefully this seems pretty speaks for itself, but we don't want to Wikipedia, obviously. I'm sure you all know not to cite Wikipedia in your assignments. As much as we say it, I still get essays that reference Wikipedia in them. However, I will say there is a caveat to that. Wikipedia can be useful, okay? If you don't understand something, like if you've got a concept that's very difficult and all of the academic articles, they're not going to probably define it in ways that are really easy to understand because they're going to assume a certain level of knowledge from you. So sometimes Wikipedia can be helpful to understand, just to get that first basic understanding of something. The trick, though, is that Wikipedia is only ever your starting point. It's never your ending point. Okay, so only use it if you need help really kind of understanding what you're doing. If no one here is studying English, but things like SparkNotes, WebMD, blogs, obviously, all of that stuff, I'm sure you know, avoid them, unless there's a very specific reason why you should be using it. Find it at Flinders is what you'll use. To find them, you had a little taste of this yesterday when you came to the library as part of the scavenger hunt. And I can go through this with you if you want, to learn how to do it properly. And you can book appointments with the librarians as well, actually. They're really great and they can take you through stuff that's relevant to your discipline. So if you're studying science, they can take you through how to use the science databases, how to use the right search terms, all that kind of stuff. Google Scholar, does anyone here use Google Scholar at all? Only a few people. So Google Scholar is great, okay? You just put in, I think it's scholar.google.com, but if you Google Scholar, it will come up. But it's Google, except it's for scholarly literature, okay? So it will only take you to peer-reviewed stuff and academic books. So you can use that as well as find it at Flinders, instead of using normal Google. And like I said, you can book an appointment with a librarian for half an hour and they can show you how to do all of this stuff properly. Or you can come and see me. I'm not as good as the librarians, but I can get you started, okay? Oops. So then we've got referencing. That's a really important part of whenever you use an academic source. Whenever you're writing notes or whatever it is, if you're getting your evidence from your research, write down where it came from, because there is nothing worse than having like a quote or something that you've put in your essay and then like forgetting where it came from. So keep track of your references as you go. You will be marked harshly on your referencing in most topics. Like it's something that's taken very seriously. I don't say that to scare you, because there's lots of support and help for referencing. Like, you're not expected to get it 100% right the first time, but you are expected to make an effort, okay? So there's a few different referencing styles. I'm not going to go through them in detail because, like I said, we'll do that another day. But just be aware that it's something you need to pay attention to, and don't forget to make note of any referencing that you use. There are also lots of guides online, again, through the Student Learning Centre website or in my office. So once you've done your research, you might want to come back and revise your plan, have your ideas changed, change up the order. You might have found some evidence that actually disproves what you wanted to say, or found a new key point that you hadn't considered before. So remember that if you've got a plan, it's really easy to change it, as opposed to if you start writing a whole essay and then suddenly you decide you want to chuck something out. So that's why having that plan is, super important. So then we get to the actual writing. Finally, step 4 that we actually start writing, and this is the draft, okay? And I think it's really important to write a draft because it takes the pressure off. You don't have to feel like you're writing something perfect the first time, because it's all about just getting the ideas out on paper, testing them out, seeing where they best fit, seeing that the length is right, seeing that you've got enough evidence for what you want to do. You don't have to worry too much about grammar and punctuation at this stage, because you can go back and fix that later. So it's just about getting the shape and getting it on the page. If you have a draft early as well, you can come and show it to me and I can give you feedback on it and let you know, like, okay, does this structure work? Or do these ideas hold up? Do you have enough evidence to support them? Or you can show your YTP tutors so that you can get that topic-specific sort of feedback. Have you got this concept right? Or is there another author that maybe you should think about using? So drafting is super important. And then, so if you do draft, something that I recommend, not like everybody does this, you don't have to do this, but every assignment should have a rubric. The rubric is a breakdown of how you'll be graded. So it tells you all of the key things that your marker is looking for in that piece of writing. So if you've written a draft, you can use the rubric to test yourself, and go through your essay with this and think about, have I covered all of the things that they're going to be looking for? Have I missed something? Could I be stronger in one area? And I also think you should look at the rubric at the stage of analysing the question as well. So you can see both, okay, what is the task that you need to do, and what are they actually going to be grading me on at the same time, because that can help you with all of your planning and stuff. Then we finally get to editing and proofreading, which is another thing that students often miss. And I can tell, all of your tutors can tell when you haven't edited or proofread. And editing and proofreading are different. Editing is when you're actually looking at, do the ideas need changing? Does the structure need changing? Do I need to add things? Do I need to remove things? Is something too weak or whatever it is? Proofreading is just that final check. Have I dotted all my I's and crossed all my T's? Have I got my references right? Have I used the correct formatting? All of that kind of stuff. If you are terrified of grammar and punctuation, lots of people are, again, I can help with that. So you can come and see me and I can sort of talk through some of that stuff with you, especially if you do have problems with like sentence structure and stuff like that. A lot of students have difficulty getting their ideas out in articulate, concise ways. So I've got some tips for you if you need them. So these are the kind of most common things. This is my last slide, so don't worry, we're nearly done. Most common problems are understanding or really misunderstanding the assignment requirements. A lot of students read an essay question and get really freaked out. and are like, I actually have no idea what they want from me. So just know that that's really normal. It's probably happening to lots of other people. But that's why we're here, and that's why you want to start early, so that you can get help from me, your YTP tutor, or from the Student Learning Centre. Another problem is matching the assignment guidelines to the rubric. So this is when we don't spend enough time, analysing it, or you don't actually look at the rubric. Finding the right resources usually, and managing time. So yeah, any of these issues, anything that I've talked about, I've said it a million times, but just come and see me, because that's why I'm here. So is there any questions about any of that? We've got 5 minutes before the morning break, so anything or any
I think it's all the steps that you do from 3 weeks, from the start
Yeah.
of 3 weeks, you do all of these 5 steps first.
Yeah. So yesterday when I showed you that kind of calendar
Yeah.
that I had, what I recommend and what I do for myself is if I put my due date in, I would take, these 5 steps, so analysing the task, planning, research, drafting and editing, and I'd plot them out going back a few weeks. So I might start at analysing and planning. A few days later, I'm going to start my research. A few days later, I might come to revising the plan. A few days later, drafting, whatever it is. So, and that can be a really good way of managing your workload. So, and especially because you'll probably have a few assignments due at the same time. So that way you can sort of be like, okay, well, I don't want to be writing this assignment and writing that assignment at the same time. So if I do the writing for this one here while I'm doing the research for that one, or whatever it is, you know what I mean? Yeah. Any other questions or anything?
So, and I may have missed it. The difference between grey literature and peer review.
Oh, yep. I only touched on grey literature, sorry. I thought I had a whole slide, but I think it's in a different workshop, actually.
Grey literature, you could expand on that.
Yeah, okay, so grey literature does include some of those websites that I talked about. So grey literature is basically things like statistics, government reports, it might be company reports. So if you are studying business and you're looking at the financial report of a particular business, so you can analyse it as a case study, that would count as grey literature. So basically it's any kind of official document. So a document that's not created for a commercial purpose. So its purpose is not to be sold or make money. Its purpose is to transmit genuine information about what happened at this company, or what happened, what is this policy. Laws are grey literature, so you might need to refer to the law, or previous cases, things like that. It will change depending on what you're studying as well. Even things like if you're studying history, things like letters that people have written each other can be considered, maps, architectural designs, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah. Is that kind of...
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Any last questions? No? Okay, in that case, I assume that Asami and Alicia will be back in a minute, but I'm pretty sure we've got a break, and then at 11, Keenan and Molly are coming in to talk to you about about FISA and FUSA, the Indigenous Associations. So I don't know where... Do you guys already have the snacks with you? Did you grab them this morning? Yeah. So feel free, the toilets, by the way, are just around the corner. So if you just go out the door and then to the right. So yeah, get up, wander around, stretch your legs, get some water, eat some food, whatever. And we'll, see you soon.